we've been looking at how Jesus' model of leadership was countercultural in his day, as well as pretty much every culture since. We're beginning to see that to develop others through an honest mentoring relationship, we will need a new attitude and perspective on leadership. But if there's no hierarchy in the body of Christ, how do we explain the passages on authority in the church and what seems to be different levels of leadership? And how does this fit with Jesus' teaching?
Welcome to Leadership Matters with Dr. Phil. His podcast discusses matters of leadership that really matter. Phil has had the privilege of mentoring leaders and coaching ministry teams around the world for several decades, and he's really looking forward to sharing with you some of the principles that have been so helpful for others. Leadership is about serving others, not power or position. Regardless of our context, family, job, ministry, or any circle of influence, we all have the potential to be this kind of leader. A foundational leadership skill that is often overlooked is mentoring intelligence. This series is based on the materials Phil has developed over a lifetime and taught in a variety of cultural contexts. To access all of our podcasts as well as our bonus leadership resources, just click the links in the description below or go to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters or icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. So now, let's join Phil as he discusses some leadership matters.
Last time we looked at some of Jesus' teaching regarding this new type of leadership in his kingdom, where there's no hierarchy of relationships, unlike the culture at the time and ever since. Of course, there is a variety of functions and giftings in the body, but unlike the Gentiles, we are not to lord position and power and authority over each other. Actually, those with influence are to use it in a way completely different, for others rather than for themselves. There's some positive example of this even by leaders in the Old Covenant. We think of men such as Moses mentoring Joshua or Elijah with Elisha. Unfortunately, they seem to be more the exception than the rule. A few prominent negative examples quickly come to mind. I think of King Saul. You remember him, tall, good-looking, square jaw, the type of guy you want to be the captain of the team or your leader. Well, no big surprise, so did the rest of the children of Israel. Remember, we want a king like the other nations, they chanted. We want to impress everyone that our leader with our leader and the prestige of a nation. We want to be a real nation, not one that's just traveling around in tents. Seems not too much has changed, even with us in the church. Now as then, though, God is not impressed. And he's on the record, actually, as being against this ill-fated desire of theirs. It seems that Paul fit the mold, though, pretty good. You get the feeling that he knew he stood a head taller than everyone, and he kind of really liked it. Though he started out good and rather humble by particularly those current cultural standards, by the end, power had corrupted even him. And maybe within his context and given who he was, he didn't have much of a chance, so maybe we cut him a little bit of slack. But after some 40 years on the throne, it became clear that it was going to be hard to wrestle the crown from his clenched bony fingers. So when the game was up, empowering the next generation and releasing them was not really in his DNA at all. And as we'll see, that really actually might be the understatement of the day. So let's look at the story from a mentoring perspective. As the first king of Israel, there would have only been no more likely candidate to teach the next king what it meant to be king. There had been no kings before him. But in those days, and let's be honest, it's pretty similar today, people in power rarely give it up willingly. Instead of mentoring the next generation, he, like many other leaders, had kind of a unique technique. I'll give you a clue. It involved sharp spears and moving targets. Now, granted, he was a product of his time, as we are. So instead of dying to self, as the Messiah would one day teach us, he felt threatened and tried to skewer the next generation to the palace wall. Of course, that was in the form of young David. In future episodes, we're going to learn some lessons about mentoring from David's point of view. But we do see here that even though he probably learned a few things from dodging spears, maybe similar lessons that you learn from getting dumped in the middle of the lake unceremoniously, but the resilience to learn things is not an affirmation of the methodology. Though some survive being dumped in the deep end, or in this case dodging spears, it's not an ideal way to learn leadership, is it? Of course, we like to think of ourselves as quite different from these examples. After all, it's the 21st century, Phil, and we've evolved, right? Well, maybe not so much. In the various countries where I've been able to serve over the years, I've noticed a striking similarity when it comes to leadership culture in most societies. Whatever name you put on it, even nice Christian names like, pastor, bishop, elder, there's an eerie similarity to how we do leadership in the church compared to the society we are embedded in. We might be a little bit more like King Saul than we care to admit. In the African context, I've noticed that there's this history of the chief of the tribe, and so pastors of the church tend to be the chief of the flock. In Latin America cultures, the prevailing model is that of a macho man, a strong man. And while in other contexts, admired leaders tend to be in the form of a general. So churches run with the command and control precision of the military. Now, we in Western cultures, we have our own type of leader we admire, and it's typically the famous person, the person that's written the books or is on TV, or perhaps the business CEO. These are all different models, but basically the same heart. The last 2,000 years of church history tells a tale of how we have taken what were to be mere functions in the church intended to equip the saints and turn them into hierarchical offices of position, titles, and power. We read back into Ephesians 4, something that the original author never could have intended, or he would have been contradicting Jesus' basic teaching on the subject. My fivefold ministry series, which will come out later, I'll dig a bit deeper into the specific topic, and you can watch that and download that later on if you would like. But for now, I think we all could agree that many of our leadership models in the church are pretty close to what we see in the world, just with different titles. But as the saying goes, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, guess what? It's probably a duck. Now, of course, we are a bit more sophisticated in our approach. After all, like you said, we've evolved and we use these nice biblical titles. But often, if our hearts have not been transformed, there's not much difference to how we see leadership or do leadership in the church and what we see around us. But what is really dangerous is that when we implement Christian leadership with a "I am the leader who speaks for God" type of mentality, it creates the perfect conditions for spiritual abuse, turning people away from not only the church, but from God himself. And that's really dangerous. I'm sure you can think of many contemporary examples. I don't have to provide names and dates here. I know about you, but I just never want to be on that list. So we need to consider the idea of authority and power and how they interrelate. I would suggest that there is a difference. Biblical authority is light years away, from, to use Jesus' words, power as the Gentiles exercise. Power is a zero-sum game. If I give some of my power to someone else, then I'll have less. Every politician around the world intuitively knows this to be true, which is why they fight to hang on to power once they have it. It's on page 1 of every dictator's handbook for success. However, authority is quite different. Particularly in the church, authority is not life-sucking, but life-giving, if used correctly. As we develop others and release authority and responsibility to them, we grow a bigger pie rather than just trying to slice up a little pie. An amazing thing begins to happen then. It's like divine math. As they grow and mature, we then have more influence and hence more authority to give away. And there's no end to how much that can grow and develop. Let me explain it maybe this way. As we use our gifts, they make room for us, right? And they make room for us in the body of Christ, and because we're meeting a need. Now, as others benefit from our God-given gifts, our influence will naturally increase. Now, this measure of influence then creates a certain measure of authority and responsibility, and can even lead to others giving us a title and a position. That's generally what happens. But, and this is an important but, true biblical authority does not necessarily have to lead to relationships controlled by hierarchical power and structures. Remember Jesus' words, "With you, it should not be so." The issue becomes then, what will we do with this authority that we have gained by exercising our gifts and callings? Will we use it to benefit ourselves or use it to serve and help others? Even if this means we have a lesser role. Remember John the Baptist, I must decrease so that he will increase. Kind of revolutionary, eh? But this is the only way to remain a healthy part of the body rather than some isolated king or whatever title you want to call the leader.
Listeners of our Leadership Matters podcast have exclusive access to our free bonus leadership materials, which include our MQ assessments as well as his Developing Others workshop. Just click the link in the description or go to our website, icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. If you would like to take a deeper dive into this topic, click on the link in the description box where you can download Phil's Mentoring Intelligence book and the workbook. In it, he discusses the key factors that affect our mentoring intelligence and then offers a practical mentoring model which leaders have been using for decades around the world. The Mentoring Through Intentional Relationship Guides are a practical model to actually help you mentor someone. They are available in several languages and over the years have been used by thousands of leaders. The content, discussion questions, and other tools are designed to assist you in mentoring a potential leader and are available at icmcanada.org/resources.
Perhaps this graph can help to visually describe the process. Now, there's 4 quadrants here with the vertical axis signifying a continuum in the degree of authority a person has, and the horizontal axis the degree to which we have made ourselves vulnerable. In order to reflect Jesus' model of leadership, God-given authority in our relationships must be balanced by this thing we call vulnerability. I found it quite interesting over the years that many languages don't even have one word that reflects this meaning. It takes a phrase or you have to describe it all. I wonder why that is. To be vulnerable, though, to define it here for our purposes, is to encompass the meaning of being authentic, of course, but also includes the idea of being potentially willing to be hurt and wounded. We're not just authentic, which is important, but we also are willing to experience wounds and hurts as we're serving others. Not something most leaders are attracted to, I'll grant you that. Yet it is an indispensable ingredient to any relationship based on love, isn't it? Remember, in the body, leaders are just like every other member in this regard. If we are unwilling to be hurt, we will not be able to fulfill the love. And the relationships in the body of Christ will be based on love. Remember, Jesus says, they'll know you're my disciples by your love. So leaders in the church are part of the body like everyone else. They're not on a pedestal or above others in the body. And this false hierarchy that we have created is not only bad for the body, but it also puts unhealthy pressure on leaders who are trying to live out their own spirituality on their own. So instead of doing this in a community, which is healthy, we end up kind of going inward and doing it all on ourselves. But without this attitude of vulnerability, our hearts will inevitably become hardened. Having open, honest relationships is essential for healthy leadership. Being vulnerable means having others that you can be open and honest with. Instead of being on a pedestal, our platform ministry aligns with our personal life. So there's no need for us to hide. We don't have to pretend we're something we're not. We don't have to be more spiritual than others. So in the body of Christ, the more gifting and influence one has, the more vulnerable one must be willing to be, or human nature, sometimes called sin, will lead us to authoritarianism rather than servant leadership. Instead of serving others, we will show our authority, use our authority, I should say, to either show others how great we are or manipulate them to achieve our own visions. Remember the story of the Apostle Paul? He writes to the early church that because he had been given so many revelations and giftings, God had told him that he was going to have to live with this thorn in the flesh. Now, we're not sure exactly what it was, but we know he didn't like it. He was praying against it, and it was uncomfortable. Its purpose, though, was to keep him humble so that he would not use his authority to abuse others. And as we know, it's a temptation for all of us, but particularly the multi-gifted among us, like the Apostle Paul. Now, it's hard to think of yourselves more highly than you should with a thorn sticking in your side, and especially when others can see it. I like to think of it, or say it's kind of like having a pebble in your shoe. You can still walk, you can still get places, but you're going to be reminded every step you take that I can't maybe run as fast. And it's a reminder of our humanity, a reminder of the reality of who we are, so we just don't get too full of ourselves and kind of start believing our own press reports. Now, we don't have the time here to get in all the details, but I never want to be under leadership or mentored by someone who doesn't show me their scars. You know, even Jesus, our master mentor, did not hide his scars after the cross. He actually displayed them as a confirmation of his authority. Remember with Thomas, touch my hands. Tom, touch my side. Now that's vulnerability. He could have said, hey, watch me walk through a wall. Watch me eat something and then go through the door. That's amazing. No. His authority was through what he had suffered. His authority was in the scars, which he kept as scars. He could have made them disappear, but even when we get to heaven one day, we will still see those scars of the eternal Jesus. If we respond correctly, this vulnerability is what keeps us humble. It's a requirement for those who want to be great in Jesus' kingdom. Actually, our long-term effectiveness as a leader in the kingdom is directly related to our willingness to humble ourselves, as Peter tells us to do. It doesn't mean we're a doormat, or we think bad of ourselves, or we have no boundaries in our lives. No, it just means we don't have to convey a sense of pseudo-spirituality wherever we go, and that we're just above everyone. Now, of course, we're smart enough to know it's not true, but deep down in our hearts is where that happens. And in this upside-down kingdom, we don't have to look any further than our great leader Jesus for an example. Remember Philippians 2? He intentionally took on the nature, not just pretending. He wasn't just pretending, but he took on the actual nature of a servant. Why? To stay humble and vulnerable, to be an example for us. Now, I don't know if you can get more vulnerable than hanging on a cross naked between heaven and earth. But this is where his authority came from, the Bible tells us, from what he suffered. Not from his heavenly titles and positions. He could have relied on that, but he never did. And I can't imagine if he, as the master, modeled that, if it should be any different for us. Okay, so back to the graph. The more authority, gifts, etc. that we've been given, the more vulnerable we'll have to be in order to serve others, so that we don't tend towards authoritarianism. Rather than just using our gifts to get what we want from others, or even to get people to help us with our vision, and that's what represented by quadrant 1. The only way to be a servant leader, though, is to keep our gifts and authority tethered to an authentic, humble view of ourselves. My experience has been that it usually takes less than ideal circumstances in order to keep me dead to myself. Maybe you can do it, but I've never learned that, and it usually doesn't happen for me on a nice sunny beach somewhere. You may have some good intentions, and we all have good intentions as leaders, but the combination of our fallen nature, growing up in a fallen culture with societal institutions, makes maintaining a kingdom mentality very difficult. Well, actually, let's be honest, in ourselves, it's actually impossible. Christ living within us and transforming us is the only way it can happen. Even when those around us may be saying, hey, we want a king like the other nations, we're the ones that say no and step down and show what real kingdom leadership is. So God is, in his love for us, graciously provides us with a thorn in the flesh, or a pebble in your shoe, as I say it. Instead of trying to pray it away or develop ways to hide it, we need to get into a place where we embrace it like Paul did. Though the pattern of the world around squeezes us into thinking that this represents weakness, it actually means that we now have the opportunity to show Christ's strength through us in our weakness. Jesus actually was glorified through and because of the cross. False teachers and power leaders are basically allergic to vulnerability and authenticity. I wonder if you've noticed that. I call them kind of codependent leaders. They feel they need to project strength so that people will need them and want them and make them king like the other nations. And this reinforces to others a wrong-headed concept of leadership. So then people say, oh, that's what leadership is, and so they aspire that, and they want then a king like the other nations. But the expansion of the gospel and the growth of the church is not dependent upon leaders who need fans or people who are emotionally dependent upon them, looking like a strong man or a spiritual man or the man. This is unhealthy and produces unhealthy leaders. Power leadership, at the bottom line, never reproduces life. At best, it can reproduce unhealthy clones. Well, how again does all this apply to mentoring? Well, if we are a leader who is focusing on maintaining the externals of leadership to prove to everyone how great we are, it's likely we will not mentor others. Now, it's fairly easy to preach a sermon or maybe even a year's worth of sermons without anyone knowing if we're applying these truths that we're preaching. It's pretty easy to talk the talk without walking the walk. But this is impossible to do in an authentic mentoring relationship. Someone's really going to get to know who I am. This may explain why many leaders opt for preaching over mentoring. Mentoring by definition means opening up my life, being vulnerable. And leaders focus on titles and protecting image, and spirituality will generally not do this. So instead we hide behind those titles, those positions, those accomplishments, rather than living out open, authentic lives. Yet the irony is that it is just those types of lives that the next generation needs and wants to see. Unless they get close enough to an authentic leader, how will they learn what authenticity in the body looks like? One of the greatest gifts that I can give someone that I'm mentoring is to show them my scars, my failures, where I didn't have faith, where I didn't succeed. These are actually where my authority and life-giving power come from. It's from what we suffered, not all our great successes. So in these introductory episodes in this series, we have focused on the heart of leadership and how it relates to mentoring. We've discovered that we need a revolutionary change in our thinking and priorities. Otherwise, we're just going to try to implement a program without the power to reproduce Christ's life in others. Becoming a mentor begins with transformational change in the values and priorities of our leadership, so that we view leadership the way Jesus did. Instead of just focusing on techniques and skills, and we'll get to that, I found that the most important to begin with is the hard issues. That's where we have to start. So next time we're going to look at some attributes of biblical leadership and why these are so necessary in order to mentor others. As I've mentioned before, we reproduce who we are. We reproduce after like kind. And since others will be picking up what healthy leadership is through our own attitudes and our actions in our lives, it's going to be really important to reevaluate our own leadership values before we start reproducing them in others. Because we're going to reproduce something, but what are we going to reproduce? As always, I hope that you'll join me next time. But before then, I'd like to leave you a few leadership matters to consider. Have you had to struggle with others putting you on a pedestal? Wanting a king like the other nations? How have you dealt with this? As you reflect on your current leadership role, in what ways do you rely on your own giftings and positions to motivate and mobilize others? And finally, how willing are you to exemplify leadership that is willing to be vulnerable and pull back the curtain a little bit to show others the scars that made you into the person that you are?
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters. If this has been helpful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share us. Doing this will enable others to benefit from this material as well. If you would like to partner with us to provide these materials to leaders who cannot afford them, please go to icmcanada.org/donation.